Sean is narrating and basically like, look how many times we can do this if you're on the Rams. There was another play where I think he catches a touchdown to cap off like a 99-yard drive, but Sean says to him, but how cold was it out there? Sure, it's a touchdown. You know where it's not cold? Los Angeles. It's not cold. So Sean is going full. And it's funny because Davante, I know his press conference is like, I understand why this guy would be good on TV. I thought Sean was already on TV when I was listening to this. So there was a bunch of plays that he put in there in the way Sean could break things down. They're different from so many others, but also kind of relating them how they would work for Davante if he was a member of the Rams and with the damage they would do together.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast. I am your host, Dave Helman, and the headline of the day, as it has been for so much of the last month, is contract news. NFL teams continuing to splash cash on their homegrown stars. If there's an overarching theme for 2025 so far, I'd say it would be that. Welcome into the show. We got a great conversation with Jay Glazer coming up in a little bit. We caught up with Jay for the first time since the Super Bowl on all the goings on over the last month and a half. Had a really great story to tell us about how Davante Adams wound up on the LA Rams. We talked some quarterback musical chairs. So we're going to get into all that with Jay in a little bit. But like I said, breaking news on Sunday and even into Monday. It seems like every time I wake up, a new NFL player has set the market at his position. It happened again. Let's lead with the big one, the one that's been hovering over us for the better part of a year. Our long national nightmare is over. Joe Burrow's long nightmare is over. The Cincinnati Bengals have agreed to a contract extension with not just one, both of their star receivers, Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins, thought of as a package deal by a lot of people, and it came to fruition in wild fashion. Our guy Jordan Schultz with the story on a Sunday night. Tee Higgins, after getting franchise tagged for a second time last month, wondering if this is going to drag into another summer. No, he signs 4 years, $115 million. That's roughly a little under $29 million a year. Fantastic money for the number 2 option in that offense, because the big one, Ja'Marr Chase, after a standoff that lasted all last summer and went into the season and led to one of the most impressive years by a receiver ever, leads to Chase signing a 4-year, $161 million contract. He slides in just on top of Myles Garrett as the new highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. It turns out the Cincinnati Bengals have money. After all, they're just incredibly reluctant to spend it. But hey, $276 million in total contracts spent on the receiver core. Joe Burrow slept better on Sunday night than he has in a long, long time. And let's get into this a little bit. I do, having just kind of made fun of the Bengals for maybe being cheap, I will come to the Bengals' defense here, because when these deals came down, you see a lot of people crushing Cincinnati for spending this much of its salary cap on 3 players: Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase, Tee Higgins. A lot of jokes about winning games 50-48. A lot of commentary about how much help the Bengals defense needs. And I recognize that all of that is true. And yet, what did you want the Cincinnati Bengals to do? You sure as hell aren't going to let go of Ja'Marr Chase, who has a rock solid case as the best wide receiver in football today. You sure as hell aren't going to do that. And while it's easy to say maybe you trade Tee Higgins or let him walk and try to rebuild the offense with all of the savings, have you watched these 3 guys play football? Have you watched Joe Burrow throw to Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins? I'm not talking about the other side of the football. Have you watched them play offense? Wouldn't you want to try to keep that intact for as long as you possibly could? Well, that's what the Cincinnati Bengals decided to do. Burrow, Chase, Higgins, they're all in place through the 2028 season. I got news for you. If Cincinnati is going to get back into the mix as a Super Bowl contender and maybe finally win a Super Bowl for that city, it's going to be on the backs of those three guys. That is not a knock on Trey Hendrickson or anybody else on the Cincinnati defense, but that is the build that you are following. Yes, it is a lot of money to commit to three players, but it is absolutely doable. It just puts that much more pressure on the Cincinnati front office. They are going to have to, A, draft almost exclusively defense, and B, have those picks hit in a way that they honestly haven't been recently. That's just the bold truth, is over the last 2 or 3 years when the Bengals have invested on that side of the ball, it has not worked quite as well as finding two of the best receivers and one of the best quarterbacks in football also in the draft. I don't blame them at all for making this decision. The offense clearly needs help because it was one of the best in the league last year and they missed the playoffs, but this keeps you in the mix. And if everybody else is doing their job, i.e. finding good players, developing good players, you can build a contender around that trio. I have no doubt. The big variable left, I mentioned him a minute ago, Trey Hendrickson. Ironically, these deals might make it easier for the Bengals to fit Trey Hendrickson into their plans. When you extend players, you get more years on their contracts to move their money around, makes it easier to fudge the salary cap situation. If the Bengals want to extend Trey Hendrickson, they probably can. It's just a question now of, do you want to, again, commit that much money to 4 players? Hendrickson, 31 years old, just led the league in sacks. Probably a conversation to be had about how much longer he can continue at that trajectory. Do the Bengals want to extend him and really have a headlining core of all-pro players? Or maybe you try to trade him, get some draft picks, and retool and get that much younger and that much cheaper? That is the new question in Cincinnati, but we can finally put to bed the debate, the conversation, the hand-wringing about the wide receivers, because Joe Burrow is going to be throwing to Tee and Ja'Marr for quite some time. And I recognize it will be difficult to manage those finances over the next few years. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun for us to watch. I got no problem with it whatsoever. That was not the only news, though. Not even 12 hours after Ja'Marr and Tee sign in Cincinnati, news comes down on Monday morning that we have a new highest paid cornerback in the NFL. Derek Stingley signs a 3-year, $90 million extension with Houston. The crazy thing here, Stingley's only been eligible to sign an extension for a couple of months. League rules stipulate you can't negotiate a contract extension until you are done with your 3rd NFL season. So Houston watched Stingley's 3rd season last year, all pro, 5 interceptions, key piece of a fantastic Houston defense. And they said, you know what? That's all we need to see. We are going to put you at the top of the market, $30 million per year. Very funny to see 2 very different approaches in succession. The Bengals dragged this out as long as they possibly could with Tee and Ja'Marr. And then the next day, Houston's like, you know what? Let's just get this over with 2 years ahead of time. No problem there. Cornerback market absolutely blowing up. If you'll recall, it was 8 days ago that J.C. Horn of the Carolina Panthers signed a major contract extension that put him at the top of the market. And look, it's normal to see guys slide in on top of each other. I just said $41 million a year comes in just above Myles Garrett's $40 million a year. That's typically how this stuff works. In this case, Stingley just pole vaulted J.C. Horn. Horn's salary comes out to roughly $25 million a year. Stingley's new salary is a 20% jump at the top of the market. All of a sudden, you start to understand why the Panthers might have wanted to get a deal done early. Even if Horn has battled injury issues, when you know this type of money is coming for Derek Stingley, just get a deal done before things get any more expensive. That leaves Sauce Gardner as the next guy, and I'm guessing he's going to be trying to pass Derek Stingley. That is the nature of this stuff, which takes me back a year, actually. Let's go back a year before Derek Stingley. That takes me to the 2021 NFL draft. We just talked about Ja'Marr Chase, the latest guy from that draft to finally get his extension. I was curious looking around for the next guys that are going to be looking at these deals and what it means for them. 20 players taken in the first round of that 2021 draft had their fifth-year options exercised. Those are the deals that these guys are playing on in 2025. If you're a first-round pick, your team can option a fifth year on your deal that pays you the average of the top 5 of the position. So it's a nice way for first-round picks to get a little extra payday if they don't get an extension. But that's the rub, y'all. The vast majority of the time, when a team knows that their first-round pick is a star, they try to get these guys extended ahead of time. Of those 20 guys that had their options picked up, only 9 have not reached a multi-year extension with the team that drafted them now that Ja'Marr Chase has. Now, hey, you look around, not everyone is going to be a superstar. Not everyone is going to be deserving of setting the market at their position. That's fine. So let's look at that even closer. 9 guys have not reached extensions yet. Of those 9, only 3 have been named to the Pro Bowl, which again, so that's 6 guys that maybe you're not interested in extending them at the top of the market. That takes us another level. 2 of those 3 have been named All-Pro. And that's where I'm looking right now as we assess the landscape post Ja'Marr Chase, post Derek Stingley, etc. Rashawn Slater, and of course, Micah Parsons. 2021 draft, first round draft picks. Slater taken just after Micah. Slater, a second team All-Pro as a rookie, and then obviously Micah Parsons, a 3-time All-Pro at this point, pass rushing extraordinaire. Probably not a coincidence that these are the 2 guys that have not gotten major extensions when you consider Slater plays left tackle, where the top of the market currently sits at $28 million. And of course, Micah plays edge, where the top of the market, thanks to Myles Garrett, is now $40 million. It's a lot of money for the Cowboys and Chargers to want to commit to those guys. But if this segment has taught you anything, I hope it's that this stuff only gets more expensive. That is what I'm confused about sitting here, is how you get all the way to the spring of 2025 to extend guys who were all pros in the first year of their contract. Food for thought. I would call it confusing. It's also what we're going to be watching here over the coming months. I'm going to step out on a limb and say Micah and Slater are 2 of the next names that you will hear when it comes to major extensions, unless some other teams follow Houston's lead and try to get a start on younger guys, which when guys that are behind you in the pecking order start getting their deals ahead of you, that's where you have some real penchant for drama. Have a feeling that type of stuff just might follow the Dallas Cowboys. It was CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott last summer. Maybe it's Micah Parsons this summer. That is a conversation for another time. It's just what I'm thinking about right here in March as yet another series of blockbuster deals comes down. All right, that's the major news from Monday. Like I said, we caught up with Jay Glazer about so much good stuff from free agency, going all the way back to the Super Bowl, really. Really fun conversation with Jay Glazer. Check it out. All right, Jay. Well, as you might guess, man, a hell of a lot of stuff has happened here obviously since free agency opened, but even in the less than a month since the NFL Combine, it's a lot to keep track of.
I think we haven't talked since the Super Bowl.
You're right. That's good to see
Super Bowl, didn't we? Man, highest rated television show of all time, highest rated pregame show of all time. Come on, man, give us some love.
It was nice, right?
That's great. We had a great time. Fox is special, man. It's the only place you can do a 5-hour pregame show with no rehearsal. It's great.
How did that go? No rehearsal at all?
We don't really rehearse. No. That's how you know you got good Bill
chemistry.
Richards, our producer, is great. He's like, you crazy dudes, just give us a show. And, obviously we have some restraints. But that's what happens when your guys are together as much as we are. This is my 23rd year, I think. Those guys 32nd, and you just know each other. And, I think what makes us special is the relationship you see on Sundays is authentic. Like, we hang out together in the off season, constantly texting each other. We are godfather to each other's kids, best man to each other's weddings, like holidays together. We are a family. And I like to say we're the first family in football.
How does Bourbon Street rank as a backdrop for a Super Bowl show? I mean, I was down there myself. It was pretty wild. Well,
what we did with Lady Gaga, with Brady and Strahan walking us out with all those first responders was so special. And we got that done like 40 minutes, dude. I don't know how many people could actually pull something like that off quickly at 4:00 in the morning, the week of. It's just special how we do things. And I personally think that New Orleans should be in the mix a lot more, because what I love about New Orleans is no one drinks and drives, right? You're taking rickshaws or you're walking or
say you don't have to.
There's not long drives everywhere. And that, for me, I've always thought it makes the most sense.
I don't think it should ever, New Orleans should get the Super Bowl at least every 4 or 5 years for sure.
I think even more than that, in my opinion.
Which, as long as we're catching up about things that we've missed, we talked about it here on the show. Obviously, Jimmy Johnson announced his retirement not long ago. I mean, y'all are such a close-knit group. I think anybody that watches the show knows what y'all mean to each other. But from your perspective, I'm sure that's bittersweet. I don't know, maybe if you got a great Jimmy story or something, I'd love to hear it.
It's hard for me, man. Again, I've been sitting next. So in our green room, we call it our avocado room. Jimmy sits right next to me. So he and I kind of whisper and gossip and laugh and make fun of things all day long. Doing that with him 22 years. And all of a sudden it's gone and over. And, he had called me a couple of days beforehand, and I struggled with it. And I called him the next day after. And also, it's like, this dude's been my brother. And we had a really, really good conversation earlier this year. Because when you get some attaboys from Jimmy Johnson, there's nothing like it.
Sure.
And, Jimmy and I have had quite a history together. And then this year he said to me, I said, we just got so close. And he said, Jay, I figured you out, years ago, but I understand you. He said, I understand you've had to fight for everything you've ever had. And from early on in life to now. And that's all you know. And I didn't understand that at first. And now I do. And now I appreciate it. And he says, you're still fighting. You trying to figure out. And I said, Jimmy, I'm trying to learn how I can lay my shield down and not do it so much. There's some deep conversations that you have with a guy like that. For him to say, hey, I see you and I appreciate how hard you fought for what you've built was one of the coolest things that's ever happened in my career.
I can imagine, man.
Jimmy's just great. He and I will sit together and we don't have to talk to each other. We give each other these little facial symbols, his little signals, or give each other the eyes. We'll look at something and we just start cracking up. He is so funny, man.
I gotta guess that a team trip to Key West is on deck at some point or something like that.
Yeah, we're all going to go down. I'm going to go down, I think, with a couple coaches in the NFL and go see him. But that's the thing, we all travel together in the offseason. We're all going away next month, I think. That's what we do. We're that close. We're that close, and it comes off on TV.
I'm going to say enviable camaraderie, enviable chemistry for sure. Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. All right, let's jump into what is going on in the world of the NFL. And I did want to lead. Quarterbacks are always the biggest domino, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, whether it's contracts. And that really feels like a theme for this offseason as well. By my count, 4 guys that started games for a team last year have changed teams in the last few weeks. And all of that started out with a guy staying put, because it really feels like everything in this offseason. It's four quarterbacks. Sorry. It all started, though, with Matthew Stafford opting to stay in LA, because it's crazy to think only 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were talking about Stafford going to Vegas. Maybe he goes to New York, and that could have changed the landscape of the entire league. He stays in LA, and now everybody else is scrambling to figure out what they want to do. How did we get to that point, and how likely did you think it was at any point that Stafford might change teams before he ultimately re-signed with the Rams.
I thought it was very likely it was going to happen until they kind of sat down in a room and put everything on the table. One thing I will say, Sean McVay was very, very, very transparent throughout the whole process. And he's like, you may not like what he hears or doesn't hear, at least I want to be transparent. And Stafford was very transparent with him. So at least you have that. It's not, a lot of times in this league, you start getting upset about, oh, what does this guy say? Or what, I'm hearing this. There wasn't a lot of that. So that's a credit to both of those guys. But it's interesting because the Stafford situation, it showed the hand of everybody who's going to be looking for a quarterback, right? Yep. And I think if Stafford went, whether with the Giants or the Raiders, Pittsburgh was trying to be part of it also, I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Rodgers ended up being a member of the Rams. And now Stafford was like the first, and now Rodgers is still kind of last to see where he's going to go into, and still talking to a couple of those teams. But, Raiders at that point, they needed a quarterback. Geno Smith made an awful lot of sense. He didn't want to resign with Seattle and knew Pete Carroll very well. The Sam Darnold one, I knew they weren't going to franchise him. And I didn't know Seattle liked him, but still certain things had to fall into place. The Giants, you're still looking at going, what are they going to do? Are they going to go through the draft or, I know they're still trying to, be in the Aaron Rodgers mix. Pittsburgh Steelers, same thing, but kind of showed everybody's hand of, all right, we need to make a move at quarterback.
It's just, and like you said, it all informs each other, because if Stafford's a Raider right now, then Geno Smith maybe gets traded elsewhere. Maybe Geno Smith has answered somebody else's quarterback question. Or if Stafford's a Giant, think of the excitement in New York if they had Matthew Stafford instead of this strange limbo that they're in right now.
I'm glad Stafford went back because I think he needs Sean. Sean needs him. And it's like, you got to look at it like, man, you were sitting there in Detroit. Like if he did not go to the Rams, I don't think we're talking about him being a Hall of Famer. I think we are now. And I think the two of them appreciate that about each other.
Well, that's the next part of this, and I hear you've got a great story for me, because not only does Stafford re-sign in LA,
story for you.
Not only does he re-sign in LA, but they immediately turn around and make what I think is one of the better signings of free agency. I feel like people have lost the plot a little bit on Davante Adams. I know it didn't go that great in New York. He still had a 1,000-yard season. He still had several really great Davante Adams games. Putting him in LA with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, I think it's a match made in heaven, and I'd love to know a little bit more about how he got there.
So Sean McVay basically goes I don't even say old school recruiting on Davante Adams, because I haven't really heard this one before. Davante Adams, he's overseas. I think he's in Japan on vacation. Sean McVay starts sending him narrated clips of Davante Adams. And listen, you saw Sean with us on the Super Bowl pregame show. He's good at this, right? He knows how to talk, knows how to sell it. But he's like saying things, and in certain things, like basically there's a certain play where like he's showing him this, and Sean's calling it out, and he's like, "Why are they doing this?" And then all of a sudden, the DB like trips and falls over, and Davante breaks one off. And Sean is narrating and basically like, "Look how many times we could do this if you're on the Rams." There's another play where I think he catches a touchdown to cap off like a 99-yard drive, but Sean says to him, "But how cold was it out there?" "Sure, it's a touchdown. You know where it's not cold? Los Angeles. It's not cold." So Sean is going full, and it's funny because Davante, I know his press conference is like, I understand why this guy would be good on TV. I thought Sean was already on TV when I was listening to this. So there was a bunch of plays that he put in there in the way Sean could break things down that are different from so many others, but also kind of relating them how they would work for Davante if he was a member of the Rams and with the damage they would do together. So Sean said it was like an old school recruiting, the old school recruiting, like when you're trying to get someone to go to your college, old school recruiting.
1980s style, college football recruiting. So Sean McVay sent Davante Adams a sizzle reel of himself.
Of himself that he narrated, and each narration, the way it was told to me, kind of got funnier and funnier. The one for me about, man, that was a great play, but how cold was it when you did that? It's not cold in Los Angeles. Love that one. It's not freezing there.
I Love also the idea of Davante, whatever the time difference is between Japan and Los Angeles, like Davante checking his texts at 6:30 the next morning, getting, random messages from Sean McVay, who's in the middle of his workday on the other side of the world. Free agency is literally a 24-hour-a-day business. It does not matter where in the world you are. That's awesome.
Listen, when Sean gets enthusiastic about somebody, it is hard not to feel the same enthusiasm back. You're like, this dude is courting you, and good chance that you're going to say, okay, I'm in. Yeah, I want him as my prom date.
Puka Nacua on the other side of that thing. Like I said, I think the Rams offense can make some beautiful music with those two guys. And obviously with Matthew Stafford back, which is the other thing I wanted to ask you about. You said it yourself. If Stafford leaves LA, there's a very good chance Aaron Rodgers is the Rams quarterback. And so. Instead, he's still waiting. So let's, if we can, dive into this.
I'm not saying that definitely would happen.
Sure. But it's at least plausible, right? It's at least plausible.
That being the route they went. And I could see him being the one that Aaron wanted to go play with.
So instead, Rodgers seems to be waiting on 2 or 3 different situations. Obviously, the Giants are kind of hanging out in the cut, waiting to see what happens. So how do you see the rest of these dominoes falling, and what is the timeline for it, do you think?
I'm not going to predict these dominoes falling because I will never predict what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. Aaron's his own dude. Admittedly, he's his own guy. Yep. So I like to deal in facts. So I'm not sure what he's going to do. But I know it's going to be on his timeline. And I think he's hoping. And listen, I will say this about people who are like upset that they want an answer from him now. Okay. When you're talking about playing or retiring or what you want to do in your last year, it's not as easy as somebody in their 5th year, their 10th year. It's just not. And I've been through this a couple times. I've been through this with Michael Strahan, who retired, and the Giants made a full push for him to come back, offer him a lot of money. He was already signed with us at Fox. He was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, was like, I can't do it. And by the way, when he retired, I'll never forget this. Michael and I were talking about it. He was trying to hold off on his decision. I'm like, Stray, you got to tell this team. They have to know what they're going to do for cap purposes. And he was like, we're kind of going through it and trying to be his conscience, which is never a good idea. And finally, I'm like, dude, you can't wait till camp. Like, you got to be good with the Giants. He's like, I know it's just so hard to call them and say I'm retiring. The finality is difficult. And I said, we got to do it. I'll never forget. He makes his mind up. I said, great. Call them tomorrow morning. Then I'll report it. So you can't go back, right? Because he was going back and forth. Call the owners. You make sure they hear it from you first, not me, not from a reporter. They should hear it from you first. Great. We go out to dinner that night. We ran into our buddy Pete Berg, I think, who ended up being one of the producers on Ballers. And he's done so many great things. And somebody else that night was trying to convince Michael to go back to the Giants, not knowing the decision's already made. And, oh, man, they busted our chops so badly after that. I remember seeing them after, like, you knew? I'm like, yeah, I knew. I couldn't say anything.
What do you tell my news? What do you want me to do?
The same right, Tony Gonzalez. Tony knew he was retiring. It was done. He was saying goodbye to every stadium he was in. The Falcons lose to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. They were like 3 or 4 yards short of the end zone. I forget what it was. And afterwards, we go to dinner, and Tony's like, okay, I'm good with this. I'm done. And about a month or 2 later, he calls me up and he says, hey, you think they'd have me back? I'm like, Tom, what are we doing here? He goes, I can't retire 3 yards short. I just can't. So I called Thomas Dimitroff and Mike Smith, and it was the head coach. And I asked him what do you guys think about him coming? What do you really do? Guys, and I had him frame it like it was my idea instead of his. And we actually, nobody knows this. We got Mike Smith to come out to Manhattan Beach to sit down with me and Tony together and talk about what it would look like if he came back. Because one of the things was like, hey, I can't go to camp because I promised my son that I was going to coach his football team and I can't miss it. And I was like, so Smitty was like, well, how do we do that? I'm like, Smitty, just you tell everybody else they have the same rules. Just make 18 Pro Bowls. You're in. And that's what ended up happening. We did it. We pulled it off. And I don't know if he was happy they did it or not. They didn't have really a great season. But my point is, with all these, when you're dealing with finality, everybody gets upset that these guys are not on your timeline. They shouldn't be. This is a forever thing. This is unlike any other sport. Basketball, you retire, you can still go play pickup. Baseball, you can still go have a catch. Hockey, you can still skate with your guys. Football's over. It's over. It is done. You ain't going out playing two-hand touch with your friends. It's over. And that's difficult, man. Losing that locker room is hard. So I want people to have more compassion that it's not on your timeline and understand this dude has done it for 20 years. Now we're saying, hey, we want you to hurry up because we want it on our timeline. There's a lot that goes into it.
What about the Russell Wilson of it all? Where does he fit into all of this?
I don't know the answer to that. I think, a team like the Giants, if they have bring him in, or I think the Browns good because they have no, it just can't be a lot because their numbers wrapped up so much.
Yeah.
Right. With that. So I think they would make sense. I think the Giants would too. And they should draft their quarterback in the future and let him learn, how to be a pro under Russell for a year.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm not going to be surprised if that's the way it plays out. But I think you make a great point. I mean, when you're Aaron Rodgers, if you include high school, I mean, goodness gracious, you've been playing football since the late 90s.
That's
and
difficult.
Now you're
losing your locker room is hard. It's really hard. I just want people to understand that. And it's a different emotional toll than you could ever imagine. It's the only sport. Like I've obviously been in the fight game for a long time. I can still spar and roll with my buddies and and as we get older, it's fine. But if you told me all of a sudden tomorrow it's done and over forever, I would really struggle here. I'd be very concerned about myself between the years.
It's such a good point that it's one of the only sports that you can't really replicate any element of it if you're not playing.
You can play soccer with your buddies forever. Yeah. You can go again. You can go skate and shoot around. You can play hoops, whatever you want. It's just football's different. It's over. It's done.
Speaking of the locker room, I wanted to talk to you about this. You had some guys we wanted to talk about with me about in terms of free agents that could change the culture of a team. And I think that's such a great point is like, obviously the big money guys are going to get a ton of headlines, but that doesn't necessarily equate to like the impact that you can have in a locker room and not even just on the play on the field. Obviously that's important, but the intangibles that you can bring to an organization, I think that's a really great point. I wanted to pick your brain about that.
The guys, the signings that I really loved this offseason, Solomon Thomas down to the Dallas Cowboys. Solomon is one of the finest humans in this league, but he will teach others how to be a pro. I think he'll be great down there for Micah, but also the Cowboys where every position is like, you get more attention there than you do if you're the shortstop for the Yankees. I mean, it's unreal to have a guy like that, to be this model of, it's consistency is not the right word. He is a model human and a great team that works his butt off. He's everything you want in a leader. That helps as much as anything down there in a place like Dallas. So I love that. And I think they need a community leader down there. He's fantastic. Like,
hometown guy too.
It's perfect for him. Absolutely perfect. I love Dre Greenlaw with the Denver Broncos. Man, he's a dude. You need guys like that. You need guys who are absolute gangsters in there and just dogs. And he's one of those guys. And when he left the 49ers, there was a lot of sorrow in that place. That was a hard one for those guys. And when you lose one of those kind of guys, and San Fran did not want to lose him. When you lose a guy like that, man, and it resonates throughout the rest of the locker room, that's the type of guys you want to bring into a place.
It's a copycat league for sure, and I love the Broncos. Not only Greenlaw, but they go out and get Talanoa Hufanga from San Francisco too, and it's like, hey, we want the edge that the Niners have on defense. I think that's a great way to get it.
I also love, Cooper Kupp going to Seattle because he can teach that young room how to be workers. Like Cooper is a workaholic. Like his level of work is just different. And he's able to teach those young guys how to do that. There's a certain level that he expects you to be up at. And even if you just being around it, he'll bring those guys up and it'll last for them forever.
all of a sudden a very young team in Seattle too.
Yep.
I mean, I think people associate the Seahawks have been a very veteran team for so long, and you look around and with Geno out of there as well, I mean, that is an incredibly young roster that could learn a lot from a guy like Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, and John Schneider does a really good job at the draft all the way through. So I know where a lot of other teams are trying to figure out, hey, how can we do it like the Eagles and Chiefs and load up in free agency and give our picks away to get some talent and trades. Seattle's the other way. They want picks.
You got to remake that. You got to start somewhere. That's how John Schneider built that first iteration of the Seahawks is with young draft picks.
Doubt. Yep.
Nail 5 or 6 of them, and there's no telling how far you can go.
All the way through the draft, no doubt.
One last thing I wanted to get your opinion on, and you kind of get a sense every spring there's a team that's loading up to go for it.
Washington.
That's what I wanted to talk about. The Washington Commanders.
Washington's doing kind of what Philly did. Hey, let's go out there for them to get a tackle and Laramie Tunsil. Guys like that just don't fall off. They're not available that often. So a guy like that, guy like Deebo Samuel, Deebo can stay healthy. What they're doing is they're loading up for that quarterback. They know we have something special at quarterback, and we don't have that to pay the quarterback yet. So let's build up around the same thing the 49ers have done when Brock Purdy's pay was all the way down here. Similar type thing. So if you're able to do that, you kind of go for it. And I like what they've done. I like what Denver's done. You talk about it with the 2 defensive players that they picked up. And listen, Sean Payton is always a good drafter on the offensive side of the ball. So he can load up defensively in free agency and just start using the draft for offense.
Sean said earlier this offseason, he's like hunting for a joker player, a running back, a tight end, somebody that can really elevate that offense.
In Ingram too.
So I think that's a good one. I think Denver kind of flew under the radar this free agency, but 2 tone setters on defense, Evan Ingram, a very nice player on offense, and you still have all that draft capital to work with. I like where Denver is a lot.
Same thing with Washington. Again, they're paying Bo Nix a rookie contract, so they're able to load up.
I love it. I say this too much, but I just love in a calendar year, you can go from not having a quarterback to gearing up to try to be part of the Super Bowl conversation. It's the best thing about the NFL.
No doubt.
It's a lot to catch up on, Jay, but man, I appreciate it. It's good to talk to you, man. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, man. Appreciate you.
We'll chat soon.
Hey, bud.
And just like that, we are out of here. That does it for the show. Thanks again to Jay Glazer for stopping by, chop it up on all things offseason. We will be back later this week. Check your feeds on Thursday, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. You can find us on YouTube. Got one more show coming your way this week. Based on the way everything's gone since the league year opened, we will have plenty of news to talk about, whether that's Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, who knows? I guarantee you something will pop off between now and then. Plenty more content coming your way. As always, thanks so much, y'all, and I will chat with you real soon.